Uno, dos, tres, cuatro, cinco, cinco, seis. Give me a minute while I figure out how to start this. There are a couple of topics I want to address this time. And normally I start this off with a Hogan's Heroes quote and then use it to frame ideology and how ideas don't change. But this is a different kind of broadcast. This is really one that I'm intending to throw at a couple of hardware vendors. And so the topics I kind of want to touch on, I want to touch on something that's gone on between Drop, Sennheiser, and EPOS. I want to go over why it is increasingly difficult to take Nvidia seriously, and segue from that into why Nvidia's desperation has political undertones that should not be readily dismissed. So we'll start off with the subject of audio. In the past, under the hybrid theory um, branding, if you will, I have talked about two specific pieces of audio hardware. I've talked about the Razer Kraken Kitty Edition headphones version 1, and I've talked about the SteelSeries Arctis 1 headphones. Now, in order to understand what I want to cover, I'm going to grossly oversimplify the concept of audio production in a way that will drive paid audio engineers completely bonkers. And we'll get this set up real quickly so that you can maybe see what it is that I'm trying to talk about. Alright, and is there some... Oh, yes. There's a thug. We're going to set this up real quickly. Breach protocol. Go from there into ping. Okay, ping out. And we can see there's one enemy, two enemies right around us. No other electronics worth noting. Now, let's go from talking about visual to talking about sound. Generally speaking, grossly oversimplified, the reproduction of sound can be described as the formation of a wave that causes your eardrums to vibrate in such a way that you hear the reproduction of a sound, or that you hear sound to begin with. Grossly oversimplified, by changing the timing of the reproduction of a sound wave or series of sound waves, you can impart the perception of distance over time, or distance and time in relation to the position of the person. So right now, looking at the screen, there is an enemy directly to my uh, my north, and I know because of the ping effect that there is an enemy to my northeast in regard to the game screen. Now, in order to impart the idea that if these characters in the game create a sound or make a sound, to impart where that sound would be in relation to me, there would be a simple calculation run to determine the decay time between what time I would first hear parts of the sound and what time I would hear other parts of the sound. Like, say, if they were making footsteps, and I'll just peg this guy here with a whistle and send him walking this way, and park, we can see him on the map in the upper left hand corner. Now, if I have the headphones turned all the way up, the sound can be calculated that I would hear the footsteps that that character is making as they walk in relation to the direction that I am presently facing. And if I change my position in relation to that character, the timing of the sound of how it reaches me likewise changes, thus giving the imparting the effect of a surround sound setup or a surround sound gig. Now, when I first got the Razer Kraken Kitty editions, I was very impressed with the ability to create the effect of a surround sound system on stereo channel speakers. What I was not happy with was the sound quality, and as I dug into it, the Razer Krakens had a 16-bit 40 something 44 or 48 hertz sampling rate. In other words, they had a low audio quality sample and they had a low sampling rate. Now, again, kind of going after gross oversimplification. There are some people who claim that the human ear cannot understand a certain amount of the audio spectrum. Frequency waves that just are not carried, so you don't need anything over 16-bit audio with 48K. You shouldn't be able to hear anything over that. Wrong. Okay, first thing, there's a conflation bias in effect here, and that most people, most humans, are not actually tested for hearing frequency at all ages. There is no science center that I know of that you can walk up to, go through a hearing test, and have your personal frequency response capability recorded and added to an average pool. That just doesn't exist. What does exist are colleges and universities and hospitals that have run voluntary tests that have a very narrow sampling selection of people who take part in hearing frequency tests. Likewise, there has been a recent push in the audio market, specifically with the launch of the PlayStation 5 for HRTF, head-related transfer function. That is the science of how the human ear actually hears sound. And the HRTF, the head-related transfer function, the science of how sound is heard, is dependent on a number of factors that are related to the shape of the ear, the shape of the ear canal, the lack of scarring or the presence of scarring in the ear canals, the actual shape of the eardrums, of the three components of the eardrum itself, as well as other different factors. Now, for the most part, it is possible to map somebody's HRTF profile, the head-related transfer profile, by either putting a microphone at the bottom of the ear and then playing a series of sounds and seeing how the microphone picks that sound up, or alternatively making a mold of that person's ear canal to the eardrum, placing a microphone on the other side of where the eardrum would be, and then playing sounds down the mold. So there are a couple different ways here to actually determine how people, or how the human hearing system actually functions. And this is kind of important because what is mostly accepted as what is the average medically tested hearing profile is not actually an average human tested profile. And this kind of goes back to, if you've been in the audio world, in the computer audio world at all for any length of time, you might remember Intel's AC97 audio codec. And you might also remember that there was a big push from VIA, Envy, and other sound card manufacturers to improve the default audio offering that would be expected. In response to the basically industry-wide push on superior audio formats, superior audio standards, Intel developed the Intel HD Azalea codec and audio system. And yes, while the Intel Azalea system is a definitive improvement over AC97, it is not by any means the be-all, end-all of this is the maximum of audio performance. Rather, going back to VIA and the MV chipsets, VIA settled on a 24-bit 192 hertz sampling rate for audio. And even if, and this was, again, we're going back years here, we're going back 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, but VIA commissioned a series of tests in which they found that these higher sampling rates, even when they were using lower sampled content, that is to say, they were playing back audio samples or audio effects or music or whatever that was recorded at a lower sampling rate, say something that was recorded at CD quality, 16-bit 44 kilohertz, that if it was played back at a higher sampling rate, the playback would be more consistent with the intended capture compared to an analog recording of, or an analog capture of whatever it is you're trying to play. Let's say you recorded a band live onto an analog medium. You transfer this analog to CD, and then over a 16-bit 48K playback system, you would have the CD quality audio. But if you listen to that same CD on a 24-bit 192 system playback, you would hear more of the audio than you would if you were listening to it on the lower sound setting. So what's going on here? Well, the short version is there's not a one-to-one encode to decode relationship here. The easiest way I can explain this is that if you have a sampling rate of an audio playback, the sampling rate that is actually sent to your speakers, that is actually outputted by the speakers themselves, may not be one-to-one with the encoder playback. Your speakers may not be responding in line, or it's your audio might be 1, 2, 3, 4. Your speaker may be 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5. That just a little bit of off between the analog to digital converter or the digital to analog converter can be enough where a higher sampling rate makes the playback at the speaker more accurate, even if you are using a lower quality sound sample to pull from. Now, this is a very important distinction to keep in mind, that if you're an audiophile or a gamer, something that is incredibly important is audio accuracy. Not just whether or not the tones and frequencies are accurate, but whether or not the music itself, the intonations, the compounding sound waves, the actual construction of the audio wave, whether or not that is accurate. And in my own experience, well, across the headphones that I have had, there is a distinct difference across all audio formats with a 24-bit 96K, 24-bit 192K, 24-bit higher. I want to say 244 is another one that I routinely run, but I think we're now getting into DSD tracks and not PCM waveforms. So keeping this to PCM waveforms, the standard as set by VIA Envy, and this is going back 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, where you had a acceptable computing trade-off where you could make a very inexpensive part and still have very good sound quality. The Chaintech VIA Envy was a $30 sound card, and this was over a decade and a half ago. So that's when you see somebody who comes out and says, oh, you don't need anything more than 16-bit 44K for audio quality. You just kind of go, okay, first of all, you don't know your audio history. You definitely don't know computing audio history. You probably have no idea what the VIA 24 initiative, True Audio Initiative was. You probably ignored it. You probably think that AC97 audio was pretty good. I realize I'm making generalizations here, but if you're defending 16-bit 40-something kilohertz sampling rate as gamer grade or audiophile grade, you're kind of missing out that a decade and a half ago, better quality parts that did 24-bit 192K were under $50 US. I mean, even accounting for inflation, we're still well under the $60 to $70 mark for buying audio hardware for a computer that was capable of good, accurate sound reproduction. And again, I realize I'm glossing over everything here, but I don't want to take too long. See, and where this propped up from is this was actually a post that somebody made on drop.com, and they made it on drop.com in relation to the announcement of a new sound card, a new PC sound card being sold exclusively on drop.com first from former Sennheiser in-house gaming brand EPOS. Now, again, if you haven't been paying attention to the audio world, you might not know that Sennheiser decided to refocus their audio efforts, that the lower end sound cards, the medium range sound cards, simply weren't packing in the profits. And at that time, I'm on a couple platforms suggested that Drop.com may be interested in acquiring the EPOS assets. Drop already had a very good reputation as a manufacturer of medium grade to high grade audiophile equipment, and fitting in the EPOS branding with the Drop aesthetics seemed like a pretty good fit. That Drop could arrange some of the partnerships to give EPOS the audio quality that EPOS lacked. Now, to be fair, I don't know if I'm saying EPOS correctly. I've never heard anybody else pronounce the company's name, so if I'm butchering it, my apologies. I just read EPOS as EPOS. Anyway, so going back to what was in my marketing mail feed from Drop.com was a second generation of an EPOS headphone amplifier. And so I go, now I've recently picked up an EPOS amplifier, mostly because it was cheap. Give me for a second as I actually go grab this stuff. Alright, so what I actually got, and this was from Drop.com and partially between reward points that I had banked in a coupon because I had purchased one of the Sennheiser PC37Xs. I picked up a GSX 300. Now, to be fair, I have never actually plugged this in or used this amplifier. I bought it mostly uh, for my media server. Just, if somebody else wants to play it, I've got a good amplifier hooked up to it, but I've never actually plugged it in. And so again, I've already bought a couple of Sennheiser / Drop products. So another one coming along, of course, Drop thought I would be interested. Until it, and two things just struck me straight out the gate when looking over the product. The first was the price point. It's a GSX 1000 something. If you go to drop.com, it's probably headlined on the front page right now, but it's second generation. It's a $200 sound card. Now, just for specific reference here for a second, the Vantech MBA 200U. I actually had one of those, and one of them is actually at the one I had. I sent to a City of Heroes player. The MBA 200U external 7.1 sound adapter from Vantech can be had right now for $28 on Amazon. Now, this supports a 16-bit 48K sampling on 7.1 audio output. Now, that's an important figure to keep in mind because this is a $28 part. The Sennheiser part that Drop is offering is $200. So it's more than 8 times the price of the Vantech. So you'd think at more than 8 times the price of the Vantech that it would have USB 3.0 support. Okay, it does have USB Type-C input, but it's only a USB 2.0 part. Oh, that sounds a little weird. Secondly, you'd think at a $200 price point that it would have 24-bit by 96K sampling rate minimum. No, it has a sampling rate of 16-bit by 40-something kilohertz. And this is the point where I just kind of snapped. Because $200 for a $28 part? No. 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 Now, what I don't know here is I don't know if Drop is contractually obligated to push EPOS Sennheiser parts due to some kind of deal that went down before EPOS was spun out from Sennheiser. I don't know if this is a leftover contractual obligation between Drop and Sennheiser or if this is an actual collaboration between Drop and Sennheiser. I don't care. Selling a audio part with sub $30 features for $200 is flat no. The product being offered on Drop, I'm gonna go look up its specific name because it's gonna bother me if I don't. The EPOS GSX 1000 V2. $200, the same specifications as a $30 part on Amazon from someone who doesn't even make sound cards as a primary business. Drop has some serious explaining to do on exactly why they agreed to list GSX 1000 V2 at all. There needs to be an explanation for why would you do this. Now, I've heard some people say that, okay, it's all about the latency. It's how fast the audio can render, because when you're playing Fortnite, every single microsecond matters. Slight problem. The Chaintech Via Envy, a PCI sound card from the mid-2000s, has the same latency as pretty much any other Sound Blaster card you could probably care to name, and every other fast card you could probably care to name. So, saying that audio... What I'm reminded of is going back even further in the graphics world. A long time ago, a little company called Voodoo had this little tiny graphics card called Glide, and they had the Glide API, or rather, they had the Glide API, they had the 3DFX had a brand called Voodoo. Voodoo used the Glide API. See, this has me so worked up, I am getting things out of order, because this is genuinely what the friggin' barbecue, man. Alright, so 3DFX, they had the Voodoo series of graphic cards. And at some point, the Voodoo graphic card, a new version was coming out, and everyone couldn't help but notice that where the ATI Rage cards and the Riva TNTs from Nvidia of the day had 24-bit color. Now, to be clear, this is not this is still 6-bit per color channel with transparency, so it's not actually 32-bit color. But the Riva TNTs and the Rages of the time could render in 24-bit color, so a full color range plus transparencies, while the Voodoo card was stuck with a 16-bit color palette. Now, 3DFX's response to this was, well, gamers only care about frame rates, they don't care about colors. Yeah, that kind of sunk the company, because both ATI and Nvidia at the time made bank. And okay, to be fair, the Riva TNTs of the time and the Rages of the time probably were not as performative as a Voodoo graphics card. Now, that's also down to APIs, because we're still in the pre-DirectX 9 era. We're in the middle point of OpenGL, where SGI is basically sitting with their thumbs, well, their whole hands, okay, their whole arms square up their... I need to come up with a better mental image than the one that I normally use to describe how SGI handled OpenGL, because most of it's either very pornographic or quite vulgar. And I really do try not to be either one of those on stream. So let's just leave it at SGI was in the middle of completely mishandling the OpenGL specification. So if you wanted to create a game, the 3DFX's simplified version of OpenGL, the Glide API, was significantly more performative than the competing DirectX protocol at the time, or any other hard-coded, write-your-own graphics engine here that would have been available at the time. But still, when you got down to it, gamers were willing to take a small hit on frame rate. They'll take a few less frames per second for having better color accuracy, for actually being able to tell what it is they're supposed to be looking at. And case in point, where I went to now, this is obviously a roller coaster that I'm looking at. Now, if I grayscale this out, or if I turn down the colors, if I did something to modify what you actually saw, would you be able to identify this as a broken down amusement park? Probably not. Adding color accuracy is very important to gaming. Visual fidelity, how accurate your image looks, the motion of the water, the shadows, everything that composes the image is very important, incredibly important to the visual experience. So why on earth would somebody come along and say, oh no one cares about higher quality audio, it's not important at all, you can just make do with this? No, that is not how this works at all. A $200 gaming part today that doesn't start at 24-bit 96K sampling rate is a dead failure. And this has been one of the, I keep hammering my Razor Cracking Kitties and my Steel Series Arctis 1 for this. And okay, I will give Bluetooth a small pass on this because Bluetooth was not designed as an audio transmission system. In fact, that's why a number of wireless gaming headphones have wireless dongles that use the radio frequency spectrum rather than the Bluetooth specification. And the reason for that is Bluetooth wasn't designed to carry an audio stream. Rather, it's more accurate to say that audio products hijacked the Bluetooth protocol because it was convenient and it was useful. And you would happily trade off some audio quality, because on a phone call, chances are, especially if you're on AT&T, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a high quality audio call and AT&T's audio quality without forensic examination. Yes, I am referring to how nobody could tell that the iPhones had a problem with antennas because everyone thought that it was AT&T at fault for all the dropped calls. Anyways, so image quality, just as image quality is important, so is audio quality. And pushing an aggressively substandard sound card, it damages Sennheiser's reputation. Even though Sennheiser is technically no longer involved with EPOS, it's technically spun off. But okay, there is a marketing link here that's being used to leverage this was a Sennheiser brand. It damages EPOS because it's going to be very hard to look at any other EPOS products in the future without going, you tried to sell a $30 part for $200. Seriously? Really? And it damages Drop.com, because Drop.com, which has made a reputation as a curator of audio products, now is aggressively pushing in marketing and emails a $30 part for $200. I know, just this looks bad all around. And at this point, it's probably too late to put the GSX 1000 V2 back in the lab, put an entirely different chipset in it, bring it up to a $200 price point with 24-bit rate and a 192 or higher sampling rate. Probably too late for that because these units are already produced. They've already been made in a factory. They're already boxed up. They're already wrapped up. So what's Sennheiser going to do? Take a bath on it all? What's Drop going to do? Take a bath on it all? What's EPOS going to do? Take a bath on it all? Well, whether or not they like it, that's probably what's going to happen. They're going to take a bath on this because more people are going to go, wait, this doesn't add up. Why are you pushing a substandard product for this price point? And that's where I want to segue from talking about sound cards and talking about graphic cards, because we're seeing the same thing happen with Nvidia. Now, if you haven't and I'm going to try and simplify a forum post that I made to City of Heroes, to one of these City of Heroes forums on this. I'm aware that it has been copied and reshared a few times, so if you're paying attention, none of this will probably be very new. First thing, uh, Nvidia is touting that the RTX 4090 is capable of running Genshin Impact at 13K resolution. Um, yeah, you're able to take a game that's optimized for Android phones for basically Mali 700s and run it at 13K. That's not really that impressive, Nvidia. And in fact, what's definitely not impressive is 13K isn't exactly a standard monitor configuration. Yes, there are some 8K monitors on the market. There's a number of 4K monitors on the market. There's a whole bunch of QHD 1440p monitors on the market, and there's a metric ton of 1080p fast frame rate, fast hertz, fast refresh rate monitors on the market. But unless you're running a multi-monitor configuration, absolutely nobody has a 13K setup. And most certainly, if you've got a 13K setup, you probably have more money than you know what to do with, and you're not actually a target market for most vendors. This may come as a shock to some people, and this is something Ford, Chevy have found out the hard way. Halo products don't actually work. People don't go to your car lot to buy a car just because you have the fastest car in Car and Driver or the fastest car in Motor Trend. People go to your lot to pick out a car that they can afford with the features that they want at the price they can afford. Yeah, this is why you see so many Kias and Hyundais on the road. Not because they have a Halo car that you can go buy, but because they have cars you can actually afford. And we've known this for years in the graphics card market. The real movers in the graphics industry aren't the ones who are selling the multi-$100 graphic cards. It's the ones who are successfully getting into the mid-range and low-end space. Intel, period, has the most graphics cards on the market due to the sheer number of Intel systems sold that only have Intel integrated graphics. Apple has a significant 100% share of all of the recent iPhone GPUs on the market because they make those GPUs internally. A lot of ARM processors have Mali GPUs because that's where those GPUs come with. So the Halo market for NVIDIA graphic cards in reference to the entirety of graphic cards on the market is virtually non-existent. We're talking about 0.000001% out of all available GPUs. Showing off a flashy graphics card, not really something that'll gain the interest of an average consumer. And this is something that I brought up before with AMD. AMD blew it several years ago on stage, and I think this was when they showed off the RX 580, and they showed off the Radeon 7, no, the RX 590 and the Radeon 7. And that at that same show, AMD was showing off the first Chromebooks with AMD APUs. Now imagine for a second if that sports team, that esports team that was there, had been playing around on notebooks. And all you could see from the audience is that they were playing some game with notebooks. Round ends, doesn't really matter how they played, they just played it there. And then they exit the game to show that they're running Steam on a Chromebook and that they're running on AMD integrated graphics. Professional sports team running integrated graphics, being able to play effectively. Imagine the kind of response that would have gotten from the crowd. Imagine that what kind of response that would have gotten from anybody looking at a new laptop. They'd have waited for those AMD APU Chromebooks to land because they just saw a professional gaming team effectively using those tools. But again, that's not what happened. AMD blew the marketing opportunity to pitch a product people would actually buy. And that's an important factor here. What products will people actually buy? Very few people, collectively speaking, are going to be buying RTX 4090 graphics cards. To put bluntly, the 4080 Founders Edition's price point leaked, and Nvidia's hoping to sell that thing at $1,200 US, over $1,000 for a graphics card. I'm I would say that I'm speechless, but I have a lot of four-letter words to say on that. Now, conversely, on the opposite side of the equation, you have AMD, which is aggressively pushing price points down. Now, I don't think we've actually seen the final MSRPs uh, for the upcoming Radeon 7700 and 7800 or the XT variants, but we're probably looking at MSRP probably in line with where the 6000 series are currently selling, and the 6000 series are. Oh, that was a nice touch. I didn't know that a rocket went off every now and then. Huh. Anyways, back. Uh, and I'm kind of interested to see what the next generation of the Radeon 7000s actually bring to the table. And what's going to be key here is market supply. How many can consumers actually get their hands on here? An important thing here is not necessarily AMD hasn't really gone after Titan level graphics cards. Now, yes, I do have to note there is and this is something that became very important. Again, I know this conversation has been copied elsewhere. AMD tends to fail safe in the design and construction of their graphics cards. AMD would rather, if there is a problem with your graphic card, there is a problem with the driver, there is a hang-up, there is a failover, something has gone wrong, AMD would rather terminate the program and restart the graphics card rather than continuing to push the graphics card or continuing to push your system. AMD software and hardware is basically designed to err on the side of caution. And this is an important distinction to remember, because I had somebody who I built a computer for them, and they sent me pictures, and there were some warnings about what man had kicked in because of a display driver hangup. I'm going, that's AMD's drivers failing safe. They're trying to make sure that your hardware isn't ruined. And okay, to be fair, AMD's software stack is ripe for targeting. Back when they were ATI, the ATI software developers had a number of aggressively inaccurate misconceptions about driver development. In case in point, one that I bought into at the time was the idea that an open source driver could only reach 75% of the performance of the proprietary driver. Now, this is predicated on you would probably reach another kind of overhead block, something else, something in the system level that would prevent you from gaining more performance. And ATI had spent all this time optimizing for graphics rendering. Well, now in 100% of all cases, the open source x.org drivers outrun on the same hardware the official AMD drivers. And this holds true with the Radeon V driver or the RAD V driver. The open source Vulkan driver for AMD graphic cards routinely outperforms the professional graphic card released internally from AMD. So what's going on? In short version, the open source developers didn't just attack the driver from the perspective of telling the graphics card what instructions to calculate or what instructions to perform. The open source drivers also approach the graphics from an opposite viewpoint of the actual compilation of code, the construction of the software that the graphics card was going to execute. And by approaching the rendering from both sides, both from what the graphics card is doing and from the actual compiler tech used to feed the graphics card the shaders and instructions that it needs to compute, AMD graphics cards generally on the open source driver will outperform the closed source variants. And in many cases, the open source driver picks up features that are not necessarily implemented in the official drivers. Case in point, Vulkan ray tracing is slowly being brought to AMD graphics cards that don't necessarily have an official AMD Vulkan ray tracing driver. So that's an important consideration to keep in mind when looking at AMD, is that they have a technical debt when it comes to their drivers. They made some smart decisions and they made some, well, not so smart decisions. A good case in point is the OpenGL driver on Windows. Very recently, a driver update dropped that nearly doubled performance in a number of OpenGL titles. Well, that's because AMD had gone back and effectively reworked their open source OpenGL Linux driver, ported those changes into the Windows driver, and again, this is gross oversimplification because it's not a direct one-to-one. They took this line of code here, inserted that line of code there, and suddenly they have a new driver. No, it's more well, what was the technique they used to get this result? How can we mimic that technique on a different platform? Will that technique work on a different platform? We can't use, well, we may not be able to use the same shader compilers, but what can we reuse? Or what can we port? Or what is the most effective strategy to bring these changes to the software application? Again, grossly oversimplifying. I know some people at AMD are probably going to be like, oh, that was bad. Going like, well, if you want to go sit through the 4-hour technical documentation on how an OpenGL driver is written, well, you can go do that. I'm really trying to blaze through this as quickly as I can distractedly get through it. All right, so that's kind of a quick look at the AMD side, and all credit here to Raja and the Intel team. They seem to be doing a pretty good job of performing those same steps on the Intel side. The again, I don't have an A770 card in hand, but from all of the tests that I'm seeing in DirectX 12 and Vulkan, and explicitly when using DirectX over Vulkan or DirectX over DirectX 12, the A770 is perfectly capable of going toe to toe with its MSRP counterpart on the AMD side. In this case, we're looking about around the current 6600, which, okay, is an older card, but it is the less expensive card and in line with the A770's price point. And that's an important distinction to remember here, is that Intel and AMD are successfully targeting screen space and product price point. And that's a distinction that really matters if you are looking to buy a graphics card. If you have a 1080p monitor, even if it's a giant 32-inch monitor or a 37-inch monitor or a 47-inch giant TV, if you only have 1920 by 1080 resolution to work with, at some point you are not going to get any benefit to a more powerful graphics card. You're not going to get any more frames. You're going to cap the number of frames that your display can possibly put out. If you have a 200 hertz refresh rate 1080p monitor, yeah, you might see some benefit from a upper end graphics card, but more than likely you're probably going to be perfectly happy and max out your monitor with a mid-ranger like the 6700 XT from Radeon 6700 XT. So with kind of keeping that in mind, then now I have to turn and talk about what kind of distresses me, and that is Nvidia's lack of concern when it comes to graphic cards. And I have to make this example, I'm going to look back and focus on Amazon's New World game. Now, you may have read in the news that a number of GeForce graphic cards were being conked out by Amazon's New World. And that was a pretty big stink about, how bad New World was. Software doesn't work like that. Hardware doesn't work like that. It doesn't. The key word that you're looking for here is thermal design envelope or maximum thermal envelope or something to that effect. The maximum amount of thermal dissipated power, the TDP. And what we're referring to is the maximum amount of watt of heat measured in either watts or joules that a particular processor can generate when running under load. There is a maximum input on the amount of voltage that can be applied to any given processor. As there is a maximum limit on the amount of incoming voltage, there is also a calculated maximum resistance that can be applied by the processor. In turn, that maximum resistance can then be calculated to give us the actual amount of heat generated or a heat generation that the processor is capable of. Cooling designs are predicated on these maximal thermal design power numbers. Thus, board manufacturers, if they are told that this processor outputs a maximum of 80 watts of heat, then the board manufacturer or the processor vendor or the heatsink manufacturer needs to make sure that their heatsink, their cooling package, is capable of exhausting that amount of heat in watts. If it's an 80 watt output graphics card, then the cooling solution needs to be able to exhaust 80 watts of heat. If the cooling solution is not capable of exhausting that amount of heat, of course your graphics card or your processor is going to fail. This is basic physics. This is basic electrical engineering. How many volts are you pouring into this? What's your wattage consumption? What are your resistances? What's your maximum heat generation? Well, that NVIDIA lies about heat generation shouldn't surprise anybody. And this has been kind of a key in the past, is that NVIDIA has been quite happy to tell vendors about the median and average thermal dissipation amounts, how much the average heat that a processor can put off. But the average heat that a processor can put off and the maximum heat are definitely not the same number. And if you are pushing a game like I am now, Cyberpunk 2077, if you are pushing this at full resolution all the way and you are pushing the graphic card to maximum, and you start to run into an overheat scenario, the internal temperature is continuing to rise because you are continuing the active graphic card to produce so much or consume so much electrical power to render your image. There's only two things that can happen. The first and most likely thing to have happen event is that the processor downclocks. It reduces voltage, it reduces multiplier, it turns off, it clocks down, it does something to relieve the amount of processing load that you are feeding the processor. Now, on AMD cards, if you are going hard full at a game and you suddenly get a severe drop in frame rates, or a sustained lower drop in frame rates, this is because the AMD card is probably failing safe. Rather than turning the processor off, it is simply downclocking to a much lower frequency until the excess heat can be exhausted. NVIDIA cards don't do that. NVIDIA cards fail dangerous. Period. This is why New World was conking NVIDIA graphics cards out. First thing, most of those NVIDIA graphic cards, actually, as far as I've been able to research, not a single one of those RTX graphic cards that New World conked out were new. Every single one of them was a digital currency resale, an RTX NVIDIA card that was rejected by digital currency miners for having calculation errors. And that's another significant problem that we'll come to in a minute. Now, with the vast majority of NVIDIA graphic cards on the market potentially being rejected or decommissioned cryptocurrency mining cards, or cards that were used in cryptocurrency mining, this has an effect on the expected lifetime of a card. If your design is to fail dangerous, you ignore driver hangups, you ignore thermal loading, you haven't been honest with the manufacturers about how much heat your card actually produces, you haven't been honest with the power supply vendors how much electricity your card actually consumes, then when users start pushing that card and it hits a break point where on a Radeon, or as far as I've heard on an Intel card, the card fails safe, downclocks, downvolts, does something to mitigate damage, terminates the application, does something to save your hardware from a complete failover so that you still have operational hardware, the NVIDIA cards just keep going. So, no wonder you had a whole bunch of Amazon New World players suddenly having their hideously expensive, bought during market crunch, almost price hijack graphic cards going up in literal smoke. And this kind of brings me back to the other point I want to make is NVIDIA knew full well that the vast bulk of RTX cards available in the retail market were digital currency units. And what NVIDIA has not done They have not taken any steps at all to help purchasers of NVIDIA graphics cards determine whether or not their card has been used for any extensive length of time. Now, there should be internal metrics, an electrical test, a capacitor resistance test, something that can be done in software to check the integrity of a card. NVIDIA hasn't released any such tool. They've made absolutely no effort to work with retailers or resellers or law enforcement in any country to rein in the bulk of digital currency RTXs available secondhand. So basically, NVIDIA is going out of their way to put time bombs in, uh, purchasers' computers. I can't come up with another way to look at this. I mean, let me say it in plain language. If a company knew that a product was faulty, did not take any steps to get that product off the market or offer replacement to that product for users who did not know that they were buying a faulty product, even if that product was secondhand, or provide users of that product with any way to determine that they were potentially buying a faulty product, what would the legal reaction normally be? Now, most of you would probably go, once I put it simply out like that, you go like, that company would be in court and would be fined billions of dollars. I mean, they'd be out of business. Well, that's what NVIDIA has done. That's what NVIDIA is doing right now. So it's become very hard to take NVIDIA seriously as a company. The price point of the 4080, 1200 US dollars, is just silly. Now, to be fair, this does give Intel and AMD room to move, because all AMD has to do is just put out 70 Radeon 7900 for 1000. That, as long as it's performance comparative to the 4080, it's going to seem like a good deal. I mean, you're saving $200. That's almost pure profit on AMD's part, assuming they could get the cards manufactured. And on that note, there is a distressing return from something on AMD side that, before I continue, I don't want to get away from. And that is, years ago, there used to be a series of card names that if you saw them, you knew that the product wasn't legitimate. For example, if you saw the signature PE on a product, you knew that stood for Press Edition. That product was only going to get handed out to people who were going to write favorable reviews about insert hardware manufacturer here. Then you had another one, and this was one ATI was infamous for, and that was the XTX branding. Anytime you saw a card with XTX, you knew it was a Press Edition card. That card was only going to show up, it was going to be cherry picked, cherry tuned, and it was only going to show up in specific users' hands in order to get favorable reviews and favorable impressions. XTX graphics cards were never actually going to be sold at retail. And I know I can hear some older ATI employees right now going, that's not what we intended. Well, that's what happened. So what you intended versus what happened, you've set the expectation that if a card is labeled XTX, it's not going to be available for retail market. And we can pretty much just ignore any benchmarks or any actions that card is capable of, because it's not a real product. It's not something that you can go down to Walmart or Best Buy and pick up. It's not something you're going to be able to order off of Newegg. As again, I can hear a number of older ATI employees, current AMD employees going, that's not, it's no. What you meant and what happened, two entirely different things. XTX products never existed on the retail market, and tagging something with XTX is a good way to tick off those with longer memories. So now, where I want to, I've now gone over the EPOS GSX 1000 sound card. Is an overpriced product with specifications that are underwhelming. The NVIDIA graphics card, the 4000 series, are hideously overpriced. Any NVIDIA graphics card you could possibly buy right now in the retail market is probably going to be a digital currency reject or a digital currency decommission. You may not, even if you've got it new out of a box, you still may want to take some steps with GPU-Z and at least check the BIOS state on it, because it could be a much older card than the one you think you're buying. And Lastly, again, quasi credit to AMD for they seem to be doing fairly well. They are getting hit by the downturn in the PC market. And this is something else I wanted to address real quickly before I went further. And that is, yes, there is a downturn in the PC market. There's also been an evolution in the PC market. Basically, because of the COVID lockdown, because of the digital currency crunch, because of all this misbehavior on the part of Nvidia and the supply of graphic cards, and the structuring of specific deals with fabrication vendors to lock Nvidia's competitors out of being able to produce parts. Because of all this that has gone on, because users have not been able to realistically update their computer to buy new computer parts unless they absolutely had to, and they had to pay scalper prices, many users have changed how they approach computing. More and more work these days are done on integrated products like Apple iPads, or they're done on Intel Evo notebooks, or they're done on the other horde of notebooks that you could go into Costco and buy. They might not have the greatest specifications, but they were there in stock and you could actually buy one. So the downturn in the PC market is not necessarily a result of lack of demand, it's the fact that demand itself has changed. How people approach modern computing today is very different, both because of the COVID pandemic and because of the digital currency hijacking of graphics cards. You just don't have the demand because most consumers have decided that they'll just have to make do. They'll go find something else, they'll use something else, they'll do something else. They will change the way that they actually interact and work with these products instead of paying scalper prices to keep the workflow the same. Now, this is, I think, kind of important looking forward, because now we're seeing a drastic reaction to the crashing PC market, to the lack of users who need to purchase a computer as computers have been traditionally purchased, from the lack of clients who will need to upgrade their graphics card, from the lack of clients who need to buy more system memory. And this came out of, as far as I can track, it appears to be a suggestion driven by Nvidia. And this really comes down to the tagline in almost all of my live streams. Ever I mentioned how much I really despise Nvidia? Because this one takes the cake. And this is where we get into the very political observations here. China obtained digital currency calculatory control. What this means is that in terms of digital currencies like Bitcoin, Ethereum, or Dogecoin, or all of the various offspans and offshoots, by physically handling the bulk. Okay, to understand this, you need to understand a bit of Internet Protocol. Internet Protocol, put simply, is a series of hops between network locations. The Internet Protocol is designed that it always tries to find the shortest number of hops between point A to point C. Now, if your shortest hop is ABC, well, good. But if your shortest hop is A, D, F, G, B, C, then something's probably wrong with your network traffic. But if you are the controller of point B in this case, and you block A from getting to you, so that A has to go a long way around to get to B from another point before B can go to C, then not only have you been able to successfully identify where A is despite blocking the traffic, you know that if this is going to C and it's a request from this location, it had to have come from A. You also know who C is. So if you have calculatory control, if you actually control the path that the data takes from one end to the other, and this applies to digital currencies just as much as it does to network protocols, if you control the actual calculations, the plus minus, the divisions, the multiplication, the actual math that underpins the construction of a blockchain, if you are the one who is performing that calculation, you have all the information. You have the A, the B, the C, the D, and everything else in between. You've got it all. China in an attempt to retain calculatory control. That is, being able to have all the data sets in regards to digital currency calculation in order to have the metadata, that is to say, the specific data on who is making the transactions, where they are making the transactions, what the transactions are being used for, where that money is going, what bank account that money is being transferred into. By being able to retain calculatory control and get all of that information by being one to make those calculations, China ran out of energy. China banned digital currency mining not because it was not an effective way of uncovering political dissidents, but because they simply didn't have the physical power generation to keep digital currency going. And that's important, very important to keep in mind when talking about digital currencies, is that mathematically speaking, without a significant, not just quantum, but exponential quantum leap in processing power efficiency and processing storage technology, you can't actually, even a small digital currency such as Ethereum cannot actually be tracked on a nation state level. And it's not like China's alone in this. Russia, one of the big factors behind the Ukraine invasion. This is where I strongly disagree with the liberal hive mind on their caricature of the Ukraine-Russian conflict. One of the reasons why Putin decided to go ahead and invade Ukraine is that Russia was running out of energy. Russia also tried to obtain calculatory control of digital currencies, buying up graphic cards, and when they couldn't buy graphic cards, taking graphic cards at gunpoint to fill out the server farms, the mining farms that were being used to obtain this calculatory control. So if both Russia and China, two nation states with vast resources on their own, could not actually sustain a digital currency, or could not self-sustain the growth of a digital currency, even on a limited, not even worldwide scale, not even a countrywide scale, on a effectively micro scale, they could not produce enough electricity to drive digital currencies and heat people's houses and drive people's cars and keep the lights on and keep the air conditioning going and keep the heaters on and keep refrigerators going and keep, and on and on and on. Russia and China ran out of resources. China wound up begging Australia for, what was it, coal? So the idea behind digital currencies is effectively busted. Digital currencies are not, will not, and have never been a solution to financial transactions. They are not anonymous, and even if you think they are not are anonymous, they are not. No digital currency is anonymous. If you have calculatory control, you have the metadata, you have the identification. You don't need anything else if you've got calculatory control. And where this is important is that I saw an article pushed to me by Google propaganda feed that in order to shore up the US dollar, the Biden administration, at the bequest of Nvidia, was looking to back up the US dollar with Bitcoin. How can I pose this as a question? How desperate do you have to be? How psychopathic, how sociopathic do you have to be to have had the hand in the destruction of two nation states' energy resources in only a few short years, and then decide that, oh, you're not finished because nobody's going to buy your product because it's overpriced, dangerous, liable to explode, and underperforming, that you're going to cut a deal with the US government to back the US dollar with a digital currency and then get everyone to buy your computing products? Really? I've seen some stupid stuff over the years. I've seen some really dumb ideas. And the reason why I didn't reject this out of hand is, well, the Biden administration hasn't exactly shown itself to be competent by any means. And again, I'm intending to throw this particular video at a number of different vendors, see how they react to it. But I really want to throw this in towards Kerry Lake and Blake Masters and Herschel Walker and Dr. Oz, because I want to see their reactions when they get told that Nvidia wants to sell the U.S. government its entire stock of RTX 490 and 480 graphic cards, because those cards can't actually be sold on the open market. No one wants them. Now, that would be an interesting, just how would they react? We'll have to see. I'm already in archive, and I'll catch you later.